we are joined by probate and estate planning attorney, Alyssa Chow. What is a living trust and why should every homeowner have one? Living trusts help avoid probate. Why is that important for any homeowner?
The function of it would be you come up with a name for your trust, you transfer ownership of your real estate. All right, I'm going to call it a day. I signed it.
What is the best way for someone to get a hold of you if they want to ask more questions? Welcome, guys, to the Greenhaven Capital Mortgage Mentor Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Odo, the mortgage expert, and today we are joined by our amazing probate and estate planning attorney, Alyssa Chow. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Me.
Let's just jump right into it. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a estate planning and probate attorney here in the Sacramento area. I've been in practice for almost 9 years, just focusing on estate planning, probate, conservatorship, post-death administration. And I'm actually located over in the Fair Oaks kind of area, Fair Oaks and Watt. And I'm just here to chat about estate planning.
Nice. And you're also a new mom, too,
I
correct?
am, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So estate planning has a whole new meaning to me now that I have a little one at home.
Awesome. Hopefully you're finding a balance. And I know it's definitely an adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But all right, so let's just jump right into things. So first off, what is a living trust? And why should every homeowner have one?
Yeah, so a living trust is basically just a set of legal instructions. We put it together to make it as easy as possible so that if anything happens to you during lifetime, whether you become incapacitated temporarily or there's some permanent incapacity that happens, that you're all squared away. It's real clear how assets are supposed to be managed for you. And then post-death, it's also really important because then it makes it easy for your successor to step in and get access to assets or just handle your affairs for you without needing to jump through extra hoops with the probate court, for example.
Okay. And that brings us to our next question. A lot of people hear about probate, but can you kind of tell us a little about what probate actually is?
Yeah, so probate, it's an interesting process. So essentially, if during lifetime, I'll kind of break it up into during lifetime and also post-death. But during lifetime, if you ever become incapacitated and you don't have certain legal documents in place where you've designated a representative or what we would refer to as like an agent to step in for you, then the only way for someone to get authority to help you, even your spouse in some situations, would be to go to the probate court and ask for permission to help you. And it's a whole involved process. You've got this court that's overseeing how your family member or other representative is managing your affairs for you. And so as much as possible, we want to avoid that, right? It's just a lot of extra hoops to jump through, a lot of bureaucracy, timing, expense. So that's something that you're dealing with during lifetime with the probate court. And then post-death, the probate court is really the place where the court itself is choosing who's going to be the best fit to step in and, deal with your taxes, deal with your post-death bills, ultimately where assets are going to be distributed to your heirs. And depending on what you have set up, if you do, let's say, no estate planning at all, the court has a default system for who your heirs are going to be. So for better or for worse, you may not like the people who are going to be in charge.
That's scary.
Right. You may not like the people or get along with the people who are going to inherit from you. And so depending on your situation, that could be not a really good outcome. The other thing is that probate court takes a while. It's typically like a year to a year and a half if you're really hustling before assets can fully be administered and distributed out to your heirs. So as much as possible, we want to avoid it.
For sure.
It actually, another thing about probate court is that it opens up the door for creditors. If anything, it gives creditors a venue to put in claims to be paid against the estate. So as much as we can, we want to sort of minimize that opening your estate up to that sort of liability.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess how does a living trust help avoid probate.
Mm.
And why is that important for any homeowner out there?
Yeah. So for homeowners in particular, it's helpful because what we do with the trust is, I mean, again, it's just a legal contract, right? We're saying, here's all the terms that we have. But the function of it would be you come up with a name for your trust and you transfer ownership of your real estate out of your name as an individual and into the name of your trust so that if anything happens to you, let's say title, right? If there's a title company that's looking at the property, they know to look to the trust instructions rather than looking for the named individuals on title to do anything with the property. So like if you were to pass away and you only had ownership in your name individually, you can't sign documents, right? You're gone. And so a title company is going to say, well, we see here that this deceased person's name is on title. We're going to need you, family member or heir, to go to court and get permission to do anything with this property. That's where the court gets involved. In the alternative, if you do a trust, and if the trust is the owner, a title company looks at that and they say, great, what are the terms of the trust? Who is the successor? And whoever you've chosen, they just step into that position that you formerly occupied, and they can sell the property, get a mortgage on the property, do whatever they need to do with it without going to court for permission to do that because you've already set that up under the trust.
Okay, great. And then I've heard some people say, well, I already have a will. Do I really need a trust? So can you kind of explain the difference between a will and having a trust?
Yeah. So I think most people are really familiar with wills and like the reading of the will after someone passes away and then, the attorney just gives things out. That's not really the case, right? So the main difference between a will and a trust is going to be when it becomes effective and how it is administered. So with a will, it's only effective post-death, so it's not doing anything for you during lifetime. And the other issue is that depending on the assets that you have, there's sort of a threshold, but without getting too into it, it's a little funny how they calculate it. But if you've got real estate, then that's going to push you into the area where a will can only then be administered in probate court. So the court has jurisdiction over how that will gets basically carried out. Versus the trust, we call it a living trust because once you sign it, it's effective right away. It's technically working for you. It's active upon the date of signature of the trust. And so the trust itself then is something that you don't have to go necessarily to court for to administer. It's a privately administered legal document.
Okay. Yeah. And, not to circle back a little bit,
yeah.
I think we were talking about this a little bit before. You were saying also there's a huge difference in costs when going to probate court or having a living trust.
Yeah.
Can you kind of touch on maybe some of the differences in cost?
So probate court's expensive. They have basically a calculation for how much the attorney's fees are and the executor's fees are. And those are basically, they get the same fee. The calculation is the same. So let's say you've got $1 million property and you have to go through probate court. There's a funny schedule for how they calculate it, but it's a percentage based on fair market value of the property. Doesn't matter if there's a mortgage, doesn't matter if there's any liens on the property. That fair market value is used to then calculate the attorney's fees. And with a $1 million estate, you're looking at somewhere around the $25,000 range for just the attorney's fees.
Wow.
And then the executor is actually entitled to that same fee. So depending on who's in that position, you could be looking at like $50,000 in fees just for that one property. And then the court also has separate just expenses like filing fees. They have their own court-appointed appraiser that you have to use, depending on if insurance, otherwise known as bond. Like if you have to pay for that, you have to pay for premiums for that. So I mean, for something like that, you're looking at another maybe $5,000 to $10,000 in just court-related fees.
Wow. So the cost can really add up.
Yeah.
As opposed to just setting up a trust for a fraction of the cost up front, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, not to say that a trust doesn't cost anything, right? Yeah. So you have your upfront cost for a trust that you pay, however much your attorney charges you. You may have to amend your trust as time goes on, but overall, the amount of money that you're spending to do that throughout your lifetime is going to be significantly less than if you did nothing and then just relied on dealing with the court system.
And time too, right? If it takes a year to get through probate, I think for a lot of people, time is actually just as valuable as money spent. So, you know, having to deal with those affairs for an extra year or so going through probate just seems like a hassle, you know, if you just have something prepared up front.
Yeah. And the time of it, the aspect is interesting because we're seeing more and more that with trusts, it's not necessarily that it happens immediately, right? Like, so the trust is meant to make things smoother, but a lot of the times it depends on family dynamics. So if people are fighting, it could drag it out a little longer. But if everyone's on the same page, it's so much faster to deal with a trust administration than it is to deal with the court system.
Yeah, that's good to know. So kind of when we're on this monetary difference between having a trust and going through probate, can you maybe touch on any maybe tax advantages or monetary advantages of having a living trust set up?
Yeah, so during lifetime, you're not really going to see a huge difference tax-wise. To be clear, I'm not a tax expert by any means, but as far as my practice goes, so during lifetime, your trust is really an extension of you. So you're using your own social security number. You're not getting a separate tax ID for the trust necessarily. It's a revocable document, so you still maintain control. But a really big benefit that a lot of people who create their trusts that they see tax-wise is that sort of step up in basis that happens and is easier to sort of navigate when you have a trust. So when the step up in basis, what that means is, let's say you buy a house and it's worth $300,000.
Okay.
And when you die, that house is now worth $1 million. What happens is you get that sort of step up in tax basis generally up to that new $1 million value, so that if your heirs turn around and sell that property, then they're only dealing with a gain of that million to however much they sell it for. Let's say they sell it for $1.3 million, right? They're only dealing with a $300,000 gain versus a $1 million gain from when you first purchased the property.
That's actually huge.
Yeah. So and it's a little bit easier to navigate when you've got a trust.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's great. That's definitely a huge advantage. And I guess lastly, I mean, what are the steps someone should take to actually set up a living trust? And, what are some mistakes or things that they should avoid or things that they should be aware of when they're creating this trust?
Yeah. So when you're setting up a trust, I promise it's not self-serving, but they should more often than not work with an attorney at least to do that, because there are do-it-yourself things out there, but unless you're just super cookie cutter and you have like maybe one child, one property, even then it can get real complicated. A trust is a legal contract, so I highly recommend at least consulting with an attorney.
I agree.
Yeah, but meet with an attorney, take their advice for recommendations for how to structure things. They'll guide you for the things that you need to start thinking about, like, who you think would be best suited for stepping in to manage finances, maybe different than who you feel comfortable with taking care of your kids if something happens to you, and then also maybe even different than who you would trust to make medical decisions for you, right? So just kind of starting to think about who the people in your life would be that's most appropriate in different capacities for you. And then the biggest mistake that I see post creation of a trust is lack of funding of the trust. So something that the attorney should hopefully help you with, but is basically making sure that all the assets that you own are either titled or legally tied by beneficiary designation or some other way to the trust, so that the trust instructions are actually controlling something, right? You don't want to come up with all these instructions, say, all right, I'm going to call it a day. I signed it. The trust is there. I've got a list of my assets, but you don't take that extra step to deal with the recorder's office with the ownership deed for your property, or you don't make an appointment with your bank to retitle or convert your accounts into the trust.
Got it.
Right. So that's probably the biggest mistake that I see.
That's very good information. And then one last question. What is the best way for someone to get a hold of you if they want to ask more questions or utilize your service? It's just been a lot of great information. And I know you could help a lot of our clients. Yeah,
I mean, just give me a call. I'll give you my info and we could share it. But email or phone call is great. I do free consultations. So if people want to know a little bit more about the trust, it's not just the trust that's in a typical estate planning portfolio. I typically also include powers of attorney. That's real important as well, which could be a topic for another time.
Yeah.
But so I just can explain all those documents and answer any specific questions they have.
Okay, well, that's so awesome. So I really, really want to thank you for coming here and educating us about the process. It's been excellent. I've learned a few things, so it's great. Even though I have a trust, I definitely want to make amendments to it and change things. Just
freshen
just
it up.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, but if you do need any more information for her email is alyssa@chowtrustlaw.com. Correct?
Yep.
Yeah. And yes, once again, my name's Kevin Odo. And if you guys had enjoyed the episode, please subscribe. And I'll see you next time for more real estate and finance. Thank you.
Thank you.